My favourite game, just for the drama and the sheer unexpectedness, was Arsenal winning at Stamford Bridge 5-3. Because Arsenal, went in at half-time 2-1 down. They were lucky to be only 2-1 down. Came back, went 3-2 ahead, but then Mata scored after 80 minutes. Even then you thought perhaps Chelsea are going to come away and win this. And then Arsenal scored 2 late goals. And I think what was great about it, Chelsea had gone in, people still thought they were legitimate title contenders at that point. They were only 6 points behind City. And secondly, Arsenal had lost 4 of their first 9 games. And even though they started to improve, were still in a very rocky and perilous place. But you saw the team spirit that Van Persie cultivated come to the fore there, and they deservedly won.
My favourite game last year was in February, and it was played at St James's Park between Arsenal and Newcastle. Arsenal were, I think, 4-0 up inside half an hour, and as a Sunderland fan this excited me no end, because I don't get to cheer much about my own team, so I have to rely on the misfortune of others for kicks. And you were kind of thinking, how much gas is there going to be in this explosion? And after half time the wheels came off for Arsenal remarkably. Of course Mr Barton was pivotal in the game. He went on, scored 2 penalties, and amazingly Newcastle came back and drew 4-4. So it was a remarkable game, if only there was some sort of football cliche to describe a game of 2 halves contrasting in such a spectacular fashion, but I can't think of one.
This really should be a category, biggest personality in football apart from Mario Balotelli, because there's really no comparison to the great Italian with all his firework letting off antics and t-shirt wearing hijinks. Apart from Mario Balotelli, you're struggling, aren't you? Neymar, probably if we had Neymar playing somewhere nearby, he'd be right up there, pulling on the masks in that game, which he then got booked for. That was terrific. And I suspect that by the time this goes out, he'll have played in the Club World Cup final. I suspect he'll have done something pretty special in that as well. My
personality of the year is probably from a bit left field, but it's actually Gary Neville, which may surprise people, but he's surprised me this year. It takes a big man to acknowledge that he's no longer good enough to play top-flight football, and I think he retired after getting a roasting in a game, a roasting as in outplayed, not in the traditional football sense, in a game against West Brom, and he realised the jig was up and just retired pretty much on the spot. And since then he's carved out a very successful career for himself as an analyst on Sky, and his analysis has been remarkable, a breath of fresh air. He's probably not the obvious candidate for Personality of the Year, but he's mine.
It's really difficult to think of all the great goals there have been over the last 12 months. There have been some extraordinary ones, and some scored in really big games as well, which makes them even more special.
I mean, the obvious one is Neymar's for Santos against Flamengo, I think, in the 5-4. The fact that he does an outrageous backheel flick to get him past 2 men, then he exchanges a 1-2 while holding off someone that was sort of terrier-like, trying to grab and pull him before doing yet another trick and then dinking over the keeper was something special.
Among my particular favourites, Dejan Stankovic for Inter against Schalke in the Champions League. It was pretty much a volley from a few yards inside the opposition half. Darren Ambrose scored an absolute screamer at Old Trafford, a real Roy the Rover stuff to help Crystal Palace put Manchester United out of the Carling Cup.
Man City had a game the other day in which they scored one brilliant goal after another, but one of them in particular saw Sergio Aguero nutmeg 2 players in one go, and I think probably 3 or 4 as well in the same move. But just remember, there being a line of players, he managed to fire the balls through all of their legs in one go and into the net. Extraordinary stuff.
For me, the event of the year was Poppygate, the scandal that surrounded whether or not England players would wear poppies on their shirts for the friendly match against Spain for Remembrance Day. And it kind of summed up all that's bad about football for me. This desperate need a lot of fans have to be offended, the petty bureaucracy, the officialdom. And the thing is that England had played countless internationals throughout the decades since the Great War, and no one had ever made a fuss about this before, and I suspect possibly the furore was to help deflect attention away from the fact that their captain was embroiled in a racial incident which is yet to be resolved, and it was pretty embarrassing for all concerned. In the end, a compromise was reached insofar as players were allowed wear poppies embroidered on their black armbands, and other players were allowed wear poppies strategically embroidered on their boots above the logos of major sportswear companies. So everyone was happy.
My nomination for flop of the season is no great stretch of the imagination, Fernando Torres.
I mean, take your pick between Andy Carroll and Fernando Torres. I guess you'd have to go for Fernando Torres because Andy Carroll, as we record this, has scored 4 goals in 19 games, while Fernando Torres has scored 5 goals for Chelsea in 37.
I think the thing about him is the way that when he does get a chance now, he just seems to have lost everything about him. We use the cliche mojo if you like, but when he gets the ball, he just seems to head on this kind of, he seems to be going through the motions rather than actually going for goal.
It's a great shame because when you speak to people, and I've been in various press conferences, mixed zones with him, he's a very nice guy, and it clearly pains him that he's not performing as he should do.
There are obvious contenders, which I'm going to hazard a guess. My colleagues may have spoken about already, Andy Carroll and Fernando Torres. I'm just going to get, I genuinely don't know if they've mentioned them. That's who I'm saying they're going to go for. My candidates for biggest flop of the year are Manchester City. And people are going to wonder why I'm saying that. But I think they've got off far too lightly for the manner in which they crashed out of the Champions League in the group stages. This is a team that spent 70 squillion pounds to assemble this unbelievable squad, and they couldn't even get out of the group stages of the Champions League, which I thought was a pretty feeble attempt. People have argued that they don't have the experience, which is nonsense because their players between them have a wealth of experience in the Champions League, and Napoli didn't have any experience either, if you're going to argue that line, but they managed to get out of the group. So I think Manchester City not getting out of the Champions League group stages was a horrendous flop, and one which seems to have been ignored by commentators and pundits alike, and I'm not really sure why.